Greetings, citizens. This is DEADBUG. I come to you bringing love, the love of human misery and suffering. Let us not kid ourselves. We as a species have congregated since the beginning of time for what we believe is our inert right to witness others suffer, receiving his or her comeuppance. In fact, it was the ancient Mayan and Aztec cultures who perfected the art of the human sacrifice. I guess one could lyrically wax, no one does it better than the Mexican. Such is the case of one spring reveler named Mark Kilroy, who discovered that cultural appropriation can sometimes be painful. But I digress.
But I had never felt evil the way I felt it that day.
Spring break came with a tragedy 30 years ago that's still fresh on the minds of some in the Valley. You may remember Mark Kilroy. He was a 21-year-old University of Texas Austin student. Kilroy was abducted and murdered by a satanic drug smuggling cult in Matamoros.
Mark and I just walked off and went somewhere.
That Tuesday, Mark Kilroy and his friends would go to Brownsville and walk across the border to Matamoros. They went bar hopping. This is where Mark would last be seen alive.
Mark had been kidnapped right behind him.
There were no witnesses. To Finley and his friends, it was like Mark vanished. Retired professor of anthropology at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, Dr. Tony Zavaleta, says a major effort was started in both the United States and Mexico to find the student.
Many universities celebrate spring break at the same time throughout the United States. Mark Kilroy, a pre-med student from the University of Texas, was just one of thousands of college students from across the state to attend Texas Week. On March 10, 1989, Mark and three friends went to South Padre Island in Texas. They arrived that Saturday morning and wasted no time joining in on the fun. They drank heavily and partied on the beach. Mark even chatted up with one of the women from his tan line competition. The next night, the three friends headed for Matamoros, a popular Mexican tourist destination just across the border. They spent the next 2 days traveling back and forth, always parking on the American side of the border. Monday night, the streets of Matamoros were jammed with an estimated 15,000 spring breakers. Mark and his friends partied and drank until around 2 a.m. when the group decided to head back across the border. As they approached a local bar called Garcia's, Mark's friend Bradley ran ahead to use the bathroom behind a tree. When Bradley finished, he looked around for Mark, but Mark was gone. Bradley and two other friends spent the next few hours searching for Mark, but he was nowhere to be found. They returned to South Padre Island, expecting Mark to show up with a bad hangover, but Mark never returned. It was as if Mark Kilroy had vanished into the thin air. Mark Kilroy and the gruesome circumstances of his death might never have come to light had it not been for a careless drug member named Serafin Hernandez Garcia. On the night of April 9th, Serafin, a nephew of local gangster and drug smuggler Elio Hernandez Rivera, ran a police roadblock and was arrested. A few days later, Mexican authorities raided Rancho Santa Elena, a property owned by the Hernandez family, and discovered about 30 kilos of marijuana. But that's not the worst of what they found. Out back in a shed is what shook the federal authorities. Inside the shed was an altar straight from a horror flick. White and black candles, strings of garlic, a blood-splattered machete, and 4 iron cauldrons, filled with blood and remains from animals and humans.
There was clearly a cast iron cauldron in front of it with sticks sticking out of it. And I'm looking over there before I even get out, and I already know what that is.
Kilroy's and more than 14 other bodies would be found on the property.
The Hernandez family and their smugglers had been practicing a form of black magic from the Congo. But instead of using animal parts and bones, this form of black magic required human body parts, and in some cases, human sacrifice. Mark Kilroy had been one of those sacrifices. A caretaker at the ranch identified Mark from a photo and remembered seeing him handcuffed in the back of an SUV. The caretaker showed police Kilroy's burial site. In all, 14 bodies were dug up on the ranch. Most had been mutilated, some had been burned, and one had his heart removed. The cult was led by Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, a fugitive from Cuba. He had been a practitioner of black magic for years and was also called El Padrino, Godfather, by the members of the cult. The cult included Seraphin and his uncle Elio, Elio's girlfriend Sarah, and many members of the smuggling operation. Elio had been ordained an executioner priest by Constanzo. Most of the victims were killed by either strangulation or having their throats slit. Internal organs, including testicles, were then boiled in one of the cauldrons. The brew was consumed by the men of the smuggling operation in the belief that it would give them supernatural powers that would help them elude the authorities, which is why Seraphin had run the police roadblock leading to his arrest. Mark was specifically abducted because Constanzo wanted to execute an American college student. 3 men from the cult confessed to kidnapping Mark in Matamoros and taking him to the ranch. They also revealed that Mark briefly escaped before being recaptured. Mark had been only killed a few hours after being kidnapped. Unlike most of the other sacrifices, Mark had been killed by the blow to the back of the neck from a machete. His brain and spine had been removed, and some of his vertebrae had been used as talismans by the drug smugglers for good luck. 3 weeks after the raid on Rancho Santa Elena, Constanzo was killed by one of his followers, but it was by his orders. Shortly after the case was closed, the murder shack and its blood-soaked altar on Rancho Santa Elena was ritually cleansed by a native shaman before the police burned it to the ground.
Say their job was to bring the victims to the ranch, but they claim the Godfather was the killer, the man who shot and butchered the victims to death.
Well, I didn't do nothing, but the other ones, they killed them.
Serafin Hernandez Garcia is the suspect from Brownsville. He claims Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, known as the cult's Godfather, killed 21-year-old Mark Kilroy, the pre-med student from the University of Texas who disappeared March 14th during a trip to Matamoros. Mexican federal police say the Godfather is a Cuban national who was praised by his followers. Constanzo was adored so much that when he ordered a human sacrifice, cult members were honored to do the gruesome job.